Hello GDQ Games Committee, I am Nerd Squared, and this will be my submission of Outlast for AGDQ 2020. With this particular submission, I'll be focusing on the No Out of Bounds category for the main game. I'll be submitting a couple of other categories alongside this as well. So the last time this game was ran at AGDQ was AGDQ 2016, where St. Connor ran the All Chapters category. And that run was pretty well received, I'd say. And since that run, there's been quite a few changes with this game. There's been a lot of optimizations found that brought the time for this game way down for all the categories, both main game and Whistleblower DLC. There has been a few new skips found that save a lot of time, and a few new glitches as well. And so we've made a lot of progress with this game, and hopefully I'll be able to do a good job showcasing that here. A couple of things real quick before I start the run. Well, first off, I'll be starting from a save file here, or rather a checkpoint here, admin_gates. I'll be starting from that checkpoint as opposed to starting from new game, because when you start from a new game, there's about a 1.5 to 2 minute intro cutscene that plays. And there's kind of two problem points with that intro cutscene. The first being you don't really get any gameplay during that cutscene. Really, the only gameplay you actually get during that whole stretch is reading a document and then putting it down, and that's it. The other kind of problem point with the intro cutscene is if you close out of that document prompts that I mentioned too quickly, you will crash the game, and obviously that would be kind of annoying to deal with at the start of every run. So we start from a checkpoint here that we've preloaded in order to avoid that happening. So yeah, now we've gotten that out of the way, we'll get started. Timing for this game starts as soon as I start moving. So we will go in 3, 2, 1, go. Alright, so first off I'll explain what the category is. This will be a No Out of Bounds run. Essentially what that means is I can use all the glitches that are available in the game at my disposal. The only restriction being that I can't utilize those glitches to go out of bounds. Even with that restriction though, there's quite a few really cool tricks that you can pull off. And you'll see those later, but for now I'll be doing some minor optimizations in this first chapter, the admin block. Like right there, I jumped at the ledge at an angle in order to get a faster climbing animation. That's something you'll see me do a lot throughout the run. And something else you'll see me do a lot throughout the run is this glitch right here, which is called door clipping. Essentially how door clipping works is whenever a door is moving in this game, it does not have collision. And so we can kind of abuse that fact by closing a door with a certain timing to where it's closed but it doesn't have collision as if it was moving, and so we can just move right through the door and skip through the animation of opening it. That saves a few frames each time you do it, and obviously it adds up over the course of a 40-minute run like this. And right there, as I went next to the library, is a glitch called wall writing. And I'll explain wall writing now. Whenever you do an animation that involves vaulting over something or holding open a door, the game shrinks down your hitbox for the duration of the animation, and if you do either of those animations while next to a wall, you get to keep in that state of having a really tiny hitbox, and with that really tiny hitbox, I can squeeze through all the nooks and crannies scattered throughout the map for some skips. You won't see major ones until about the halfway point of the run, but there's quite a few small ones that we do in the first half. Like right there, it skipped having to go through the library where we meet an NPC that talks about these enemies called variants that are roaming through the asylum that we'll come across later. So that glitch that I just did, it might have seemed like I was going out of bounds, but trust me, I'm not actually going out of bounds when I do that. It's just that my camera sometimes peeks out of bounds while I do those wall rides. So I have to get to this key card here in order to go to the security office to open the front doors so I can attempt to leave. And as I go through this hallway here, I'm going to do another wall ride because there's normally a cutscene here where this guy in the wheelchair down the hall would jump scare us. Unfortunately, I missed it. What I was trying to do was do a wall right there and jump past the trigger for the cutscene. Unfortunately, I was just a little bit off on the first jump, and I ended up losing the wall ride and hitting the trigger for the cutscene. That's kind of the scary thing with wall rides, is that if you move too far off the wall you're wall riding on, your hitbox won't be tiny anymore, and it will expand back to its normal size. That's kind of the main caveat that makes doing wall rides kind of scary, but thankfully for most of the wall rides we'll be doing in this run, missing a wall ride by going too far off the wall doesn't waste too much time. There's one particular wall ride later that'll lose me 50 seconds if something like that happens, but the wall ride in particular that I'm talking about is pretty consistent, so that shouldn't happen. But we'll see how it goes later. That's like 25 minutes in. Anyway, after we turn on the computer there, we're going to encounter Chris for the first time, who was kind of that big burly guy that threw us out the window just a bit ago. I actually did a little trick there where, as he was breaking down the door, I nudged myself into the door frame. What that did is, when Chris knocked down the door, his hitbox kind of went through my hitbox, which allowed me to leave the room a little early. You're normally supposed to wait in a locker until Chris leaves the room there, but by just doing that trick I did, we can avoid having to do that. So after Father Martin, who is that character that just shut off the power, turned off the power, we have to go to this basement section where there's these switches and then a central switch to turn the power back on so we can progress to the next chapter. And this is our first real encounter with an enemy in the run. We don't have to worry about enemies too much. They are very manipulatable, as you'll see later. And even when you're not manipulating their actions, a property of the enemies is that if they are in the way and you move into them, they'll politely just kind of shuffle to the side to get out of your way, which is pretty nice. So this enemy isn't too difficult to deal with. You just kind of have to run past him. He's a bit of a pushover. There are some enemies we'll have to deal with later that are kind of difficult to get past, so hopefully they don't cause too many issues. So we dealt with the enemy there, we turned the power back on, and we're going to go into the office here to progress in the next chapter. There's normally a 45-second or so cutscene here, but we can skip it by saving and exiting. Kind of how the checkpoints work in this game is whenever you reload to a checkpoint, there's a default spawn point, and you reload at that default spawn point. And in some cases like this, it can either teleport you a bit farther in the map than where you got the checkpoint, or in this case it can let you skip cutscenes. Most of the time I'll be using it to like save warp forward. Very rarely does it actually let you skip cutscenes or animations like that, but you'll see that a few times in the run. I'm going to start off this chapter, the prison, by doing a wall ride. Now it's a minor optimization, doing this saves around 0.1 seconds, but it's definitely necessary for PB and world record attempts nowadays. This game, like most other survival horror games, is all about very minor optimizations, to the point where like there's like a 1 minute difference between, say, my PB and the top level run and the world record, just by movement optimizations alone. It's actually kind of crazy. So right there I just did something called ledge run. It kind of works in a similar way to wall riding, where if you use the look behind while running animation as you come up to a ledge, your hitbox will shrink and you'll just run across the ledge. You're normally supposed to shimmy across the ledge that I just ran across there, but shimmying across the ledge is slow, so we ledge run instead. So there's two enemies I have to deal with here, kind of like the previous enemy I dealt with in the admin block. They're pretty simple to deal with. I just have to run past them. This second guard though, or enemy rather, I'm going to try to do a bit of manipulation to get him in a more favorable spot, which I got. For most enemy dodges in this game, you want to be sure that you don't get hit, because if you get hit in this game, there's a knockback that occurs, and that knockback wastes about a second because you get sent back a little bit. So you really want to avoid getting hit in this run, especially in the room coming up where the enemy is a one-hit kill. Enemies in this game are, like I said, they're very manipulatable, because If you move in a certain way, the enemies will path in the direction you move towards. And so you can kind of abuse that fact to bait the enemies to move in a certain way, and then jump past them to avoid getting hit. Like I just mentioned, that will be particularly important in this next room, because the enemy we'll be coming across here, which is called the Naked Twin, is a one-hit kill, because he hits you with his machete. So let's hope we get it here. The method I'll be using here is pretty consistent, at least for me. There we go. So we just bait him into swinging his machete at us there, and run past him. You're supposed to shimmy across that window ledge there, but of course we avoided doing that. So I'm going to do a small skip here with door clipping. I'm going to door clip on that door. Hopefully animation cancel that button. Unfortunately I didn't get it. The timing for that one is pretty tight. And you're normally supposed to hit that trigger there by dropping from an air vent, but the trigger is always there no matter what you do to get out of that room. So we just door clip out of the room and hit the trigger for this cutscene where Miles gets blown out the window and lands on this pile of bodies. Something I should get out there right now is that this game can get pretty graphic at times, but don't worry about it. There's not too much graphic content that we really come across in a speedrun. So I'll explain the animation cancel glitch that I just did, or tried doing at least, as I went in that room. For animations that involve pressing a button, turning a key, or I believe there's one other type of animation, but I'm forgetting it at the moment. You can cancel the animation by pressing crouch in the midst of the animation. For most animation cancels, the timing is pretty lenient, but in that particular case where I was trying to animation cancel that button, you have to press crouch and interact basically at the exact same time for that one to work. So here's the first and only time you'll see door boosting in this run. I almost thought I didn't get it there, but we're fine. Door boosting works in a similar way to door clipping, I believe, where, as I mentioned before, doors don't have collision when they're moving, but as soon as they stop moving, they regain collision. And so we utilize that fact by jumping into the door right as it regains collision, so we get stuck inside the door. And when you get stuck in an object on top of, or stuck in an object in this game, you get boosted on top of that object. So we utilize that to skip the second half of prison, right there, where we have to shimmy across some ledges. And also right there we did a door ride, or wall ride rather, by vaulting over that barrier to skip going through that tunnel crawl space there. That ends up saving around 5 seconds. So to progress the series here, we have to turn 2 valves. We can't skip doing them. In order to do that, we'd have to go out of bounds, and that's obviously banned in this, so we do have to turn the valves. Coming up when I get on this hallway, there's a pretty specific dodge I'm going to try to do here to get past Chris. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. I ended up getting hit there. For an actual marathon run, it doesn't matter too much if I get hit, because like I said, it only wastes a second, but for a PB or world record attempt run, it's definitely kind of devastating to miss an enemy dodge. So I'm going to hit the second valve here. As soon as the second valve animation starts, the checkpoint triggers, which I checkpoint reload off of. And I'm going to go over here to this ladder. You're normally supposed to climb down it, but ladders are slow, so I'm just going to jump down it. There's a safer method, or a bit of a faster method you can do for that jump, but I'm not very confident with it, so I went with baby strats there, where I took time to line up the jump, and then jump down. So, at face value, you might have thought I would have died from that jump, but I didn't. And the reason that is because when I fell down that ladder hole, as I'll say, I ended up hitting a tiny invisible ledge, and that ledge was just high enough to where I wouldn't die from fall damage. And then immediately after, when I drop down from that invisible ledge, you don't take fall damage. And so we can just continue on. And I did another ladder skip there. Thankfully it doesn't require as convoluted as the setup as the previous one. You can just jump down and the angle is pretty lenient. So something I'll explain right now that I haven't touched on quite yet is crouching. Where you crouch when you go into crawl spaces is fairly important, because if you crouch with a certain timing as you go into a crawl space, you can carry the momentum, or at least some of the momentum, that you had while sprinting in order to get into the vent a bit faster. It's one of the optimizations that you really have to go for in a top level run. One of the other optimizations that you go for in a top level run is saving and exiting. I mentioned before that save and exits kind of warp you a bit forward in the map in some cases, and I do that there to get on top of that catwalk. Little save and exit optimizations like that are absolutely key for getting a top level run in this game. Even ones that save like just a few milliseconds are necessary for record attempts nowadays. I want to give special shoutouts to FalXBoy, who pushed the record for each of the categories in this game down by quite a bit, and has optimized this game pretty much to its limits. He's done quite a bit of work with this game, and I commend him for that. So that bit section that we just went through, your movement speed is normally slowed down when you go through water, like that water we just went through. But it turns out that if you just spam jump as you go through the water, that movement speed decrease is negated. And so I utilize that whenever I go through water. That's the only section, as far as I'm aware, where you encounter water. So that's the only place where it gets used. So I'm going to go up these stairs here. The thing with these stairs is that they're really infamous for causing lag. That can really screw you up if lag is particularly bad, but thankfully the lag played nice. I'm only going to push this thing once, and then try to squeeze through this crawl space here. That's a little optimization. And we're coming up to a chase sequence here before a penultimate part of the game, I'd say. We're about halfway through the run, almost at least at this point. And at the end of the chase sequence, we'll have a cutscene with a pretty infamous character in this game. But until then, we're gonna have the chase sequence, as I said. And there's a few movement optimizations you can do to make this chase sequence really quick. First movement optimization that you'll see right here, that I did at the very start of the run actually, is something called butt bouncing. Essentially how butt bouncing works is if you move sideways out of events, and then a jump as soon as you touch the ground. It's not as precise as like bunny hopping or something like that, but it's pretty lenient. You'll stay in the crouch state, but you'll have your normal jumping speed, or running speed rather. And so you can utilize that to save a bit of time. I'm going to do it again here when I drop down out of this crawl space. I'm going to do 4 here. I don't want to do 5 there, because if I do end up doing 5 butt bounces there, I risk overshooting that doorway there and I need to jump through. Alright. So I did a save and exit there as soon as I hit that checkpoint. That works me forward in the map, and that skips the animation of Miles, who is the main character of this game, climbing up onto the ledge there. So there's some people chasing after us. We don't have to worry about that. We can just go in this dumbwaiter and not have to worry about them. Alright. So we're around halfway through the run now, after ending off this cutscene. Or, yeah, we're roughly halfway through the run at this point. And like with every horror game, we have a cutscene with everyone's favorite type of horror character, which is a crazy doctor. And this is a pretty long cutscene, and thankfully the only long cutscene in the run. It's around 4.5 minutes long, so I'll take this time to explain the lore behind the game. So, in this game, in Outlast 1, we play as this freelance reporter named Miles Upshur. We get an anonymous email, or anonymous tip in the form of an email, where the email basically says, from this anonymous person, hey, there's this group of people, this company, doing some really screwed up things in this asylum, the Mount Massive Asylum as it's called in-game. Help me expose these people. We agreed to that, and obviously we bit off a bit more than we could chew by entering this asylum, because we've encountered a few crazy people that have been trying to kill us. In particular, we come across this guy here, who is called Dr. Traeger. The story behind Traeger is was higher up in the company that was invading this asylum, the Murkoff Corporation. And he ended up getting subjected to this thing called the morphogenic engine that caused him to go crazy. And as a result of him going crazy, he ended up experimenting on some of the patients, and hence the fact that he has this doctor moniker about him. And you can see some of his victims on the side of the hallway here as he wheels us to our doom. So yeah, this cutscene is fairly long, and so it'll be a pretty good point for donations for the actual marathon run. And again, like I mentioned before, this game can get fairly graphic at parts, and this is definitely a prime point for that, because later on in this cutscene, well, first off, there's that blood on the mirror, but second of all, later on during this cutscene, spoilers, Traeger, after this long-winded speech, will cut off her fingers. Which is probably one of the more gorier parts of the game for sure. Like I said, we don't have to worry about that too much. There's some ways we can alleviate the gore. For example, right here, while he's wheeling us through the hallways there, we can point the camera at the ceiling in order to avoid having to look at this blood here. And when he cuts off her fingers later during this cutscene, you don't really see it happen. As soon as he cuts off her fingers, the camera kind of points or pans away from our hands as he's cutting off her fingers. Traeger, by the way, has some really good lines. You'll hear those later during the chase sequence coming up. So yeah, like I said, he gives us that long speech and then cuts off her fingers, like the crazy doctor he is. So after he cuts off our fingers there and wheels his tray of tools out of the room, we're going to have a Q2E where we have to shake the mouse to get out of the wheelchair. There you can see Miles showing off his severed fingers. Like I said, we have to do this quick time event where we shake the mouse to get out of the wheelchair. Fun fact about that QTE, the prompt kind of implies that you have to shake the mouse really fast to get out of the wheelchair. It's actually not the case. That QTE will accept your input no matter how fast you move the mouse. You do actually have to move the mouse there, though, otherwise you won't get out of the wheelchair. So you have about 30 seconds or so until an upcoming chase sequence starts. So during that time, I'm going to do a wall right here. This saves a bit of time because this will let me leave the room as soon as Traeger opens this set of double doors right here. To be like with the other wall rides, I have to be careful to not lose my wall right there, but thankfully I didn't. No crud. Speak of the devil. That's fine, I get one more try. I can do this if I get it really fast. Got this just in time, maybe. I got it just in time. Alright, thank goodness. So, like I said, we can leave the room early as soon as Traeger opens the double doors there. Like I mentioned before, we do a minor movement optimization where we jump at ledges at an angle to get a faster climb animation. I'm going to push this thing here and open this door to the elevator for later during the chase sequence. I'm going to try to get past Traeger here to make this chase sequence a bit safer. To do that, I go and lure him into this room, and then bait him like that, and then just lock him in this room. By doing that, instead of opening the door like a normal person, he instead bashes open the door. So that buys me enough time to push that object there and then open this door to progress with the chase sequence. The reason I'm taking this route here is we need to get a key to actually operate the elevator that we need to progress with the chapter. And the key is in this room coming up that we need to take this route to get to. There's a buff bounce I can do here as soon as I drop down from this crawl space. Unfortunately, I missed it. I was a bit late on my jump input, but that's fine. So I'm going to do a strat here found by a runner named Brimstone. I'm going to lean into this door frame, and it'll give me the wall ride glitch. So I can clip through the door as soon as Traeger opens it. Just like that, and squeeze past him. Saves around a second or two there. And when I interact with the button here, I can animation cancel it. There we go. I kind of missed the prompt. I was pressing crouch before I pressed left click. That's why I kept missing the prompt there. Running forward into the cutscene trigger there doesn't actually save time. The cutscene starts at the same time every time, pretty much. So Traeger gets crushed between the elevator and the floor there. Appropriate revenge for someone who cuts off her fingers. And this is where the major skips of the run begin. Normally in this part of the game, there's a fire in the cafeteria that you have to put out by turning on some sprinklers. And then after that, you'd be able to progress to the end of the chapter. Instead, I'm going to do a wall ride here to skip to the end of the chapter. This particular wall ride can be kind of scary, or this particular skip rather, can be kind of scary if it goes wrong. Because if you fall off in the incorrect way right there, you'll fall out of bounds and have to reload, which is not fun. And also right here, I have to be sure that I don't go too close to that archway when I hit the checkpoint, otherwise the level will deload and that would invalidate the run, which is obviously no bueno. So after doing that skip, we go into the next chapter of the game, which is the courtyard. This latter half of the run is kind of big skip after big skip, which you'll definitely see over the next 6 minutes or so here. Because we'll be doing another one right here as soon as I open this door. By doing this wall right here, I'll skip half of the courtyard. And this particular wall ride is kind of tricky, because this wall, by moving along here, really likes to push you off no matter what movement method you use. I jump along the wall there because I find it to be the safest method, and also the fastest. So we just skip half the courtyard right there. Gonna keep on chugging along. Coming up is another ledge run, kind of like the one I did in prison. This one is a lot more annoying than the prison one though, because you have to jump at the ledge before you actually do the ledge run. And the window for it is pretty tight. If you jump slightly off the angle that I'll be attempting here, or slightly off from the angle I'll be doing here, you'll either completely miss the ledge or get pushed off the ledge when you try to move along it. So we'll see what happens here. There we go, first try. So by doing that, we end up saving around 10 seconds or so. Well, another one of those minor skips. And here I'll be doing an AI manip of sorts. Before I go to this crawl space here, I'm going to intentionally have Chris hit me. And I do that because if Chris doesn't hit me before I go through that crawl space, he will grab me and throw me the opposite direction as I try to enter the crawl space. And that obviously wastes a lot of time, because we have to spend time dodging Chris. So coming up right here is a pretty big skip. It's also the hardest skip of the run, so I'll have to concentrate for it. Basically, by doing this trick, we will skip 80% of this chapter or so. And I'll describe what we end up skipping later, because I have to concentrate for it here. The reason I have to concentrate for it is it's a very long wall ride, and as I kind of mentioned before, I will lose 50 seconds if I mess this up. So I'll be careful for it here. Right here, though, I'll be utilizing a step that's pretty consistent. So now over yet, I still have to drop onto the floor here, while keeping my tiny hitbox, and we got it. Be careful going around this pipe, because going around that pipe can tend to cause me to lose my hitbox there. And we're fine. We got first try. Yay. So I'm not exaggerating when I say that's the hardest skip of the run. I cannot tell you how many times that skip alone has killed PB pace runs. It's really heartbreaking when I lose a skip to that run, because it's 2/3 of the way in. So yeah, by doing that skip, what we ended up skipping is a section where we'd have to grab some fuses to activate a laundry chute. From that laundry chute, we get a key that would give us access to the 3rd floor. Once we get to the 3rd floor, we get into this sequence here, where we drop our camera down a hole. We'd have to go and retrieve it. We skipped the first half of that camera grabbing sequence though, and we just went and grabbed the camera. And so we're climbing back up now to progress with the chapter. So that's one of the biggest skips of the game, or one of the biggest skips of the run. If not the biggest, because by skipping 8% of the chapter, like I said, we end up saving around 2 to 3 minutes. So we'll keep on chugging along here. I'm going to do a small skip here. It's not really a skip, but I count it as one. Fortunately, I failed it, because I timed the jump too late. Basically, I want to press jump there as the floorboards are collapsing at the last possible moment. I'm failing it right now. Oh my gosh. Like I said, I want to press jump at the last possible moment here. There we go. To land onto the 4 planks there, you normally have to jump across some ledges to land at that spot where I jumped. But by jumping at that point, we can just land on those planks and not have to worry about platforming. I don't know what happened there. I was just timing the jump really late for some odd reason. So now we're in the second to last chapter of the game already, which is the return, we'll be going to the administration block, or admin block again. And coming up will be another pretty big skip that looks really cool. But before that though, we have our friend that I'll call Jim. He's been sleeping on the job, so we'll give him a bit of a boost so we can get out of this vent. The game can lag spike there when you get out of the vent. It's rare, but it happens. So normally in this part of the game, there'd be a section where you go in the theater to get a key to the 3rd floor. Once you get to the 3rd floor, there'd be a cutscene where Father Martin, who we met before, kills himself by burning himself on a cross. And then you get a key to the elevator that leads to the last chapter of the game. I'm gonna do this series of jumps after a wall ride to go straight to the chapel instead of having to do all that nonsense. And at the very end of that sequence where I was kind of moving on the railing of the stairway, I moved to the right because if I move too far to the left there after dropping off the stairs, an NPC would close the door on me and force me to do that last section before the chapel here as intended. And I also did a wall ride, or not a wall ride, but a door clip there to skip the cutscene I mentioned where Father Martin burns himself to death. So yeah, we get the key to the elevator that we think will lead us to freedom, and nope. There we go. Turns out to be just a ruse. What's actually going to happen here is the elevator will send us to this underground lab, which is where the last part of the game will be. This chapter of the game is pretty unique, I'd say, as far as sequence breaks and glitches go. There's actually not a whole lot you can do to break or sequence break this chapter. For whatever reason, you just can't go out of bounds in this chapter. There are some skips we'll be doing later, or rather some small tricks I'll be doing throughout this chapter, but for the most part, this chapter is pretty rock solid, again, as far as glitches and sequence breaks go. Which is kind of weird when you consider that most of the other chapters in this game can be broken wide open with glitches. So yeah. Kind of a side effect of skipping the Father Martin cutscene from earlier is the game still thinks we're in the cutscene, and so it just continuously plays the music until it gets interrupted by another music track, which will happen once we hit this checkpoint here from around the corner. Because the chase music will start playing and it'll overlap the music and eventually cancel out the music that's currently playing, as you just heard there. So we're gonna interact with the store to getting a checkpoint. Basically, we want to go to the very end of the hallway there and then run back to trigger this cutscene. And that black ghost right there, that is someone called the Wall Rider, who I'll explain more about in a bit. He's gonna beat up Chris here like a bully, and eventually drag him into that vent there. One of the more graphic deaths of the game, right there. Alright, so we have to go into this room right here to our left, where we meet a character named Wernicke. Wernicke here is basically one of the higher-ups of the Murkoff Corporation, and I'll explain more about the Murkoff Corporation and what they've been doing here. I kind of explained the plot a bit ago during the trigger cutscene, but I want to explain it more in depth here. So what's actually happening in this asylum is the Murkoff Corporation, who I mentioned before, kind of took over this asylum and started doing experiments on the patients under the guise of doing charity work, oddly enough. Which is kind of scummy of them, but hey. Anyway, they do that, and one of the things that they've been testing in these experiments is something called the morphogenic engine. They've been utilizing that on the patients to cause psychosomatic effects on the patient's brains in order to create this thing called the Wall Rider. It's a little convoluted when you really read into it, but that's the gist of it. And as a result of these tests with nanobots and morphogenic engine, this being, the black ghost that we came across before, ends up being created, who is actually called the Wall Rider. Who has been kind of terrorizing all of the patients as well as all the staff members of the asylum, including these security guards right here. And so, what Wernicke tells us here in this cutscene is there's this guy who's been controlling the Wall Rider named Billy Hope, and Wernicke tasks us with killing Billy Hope in order to finish off the game. In order to kill Billy Hope, we have to do a few things. We have to turn off the valve to Billy's life support fluid. We have to cut the wires to his life support system, and then turn off the switch to turn off that system. And that involves doing a wild goose chase to find all the components we need to shut off. And one thing I can talk about here in the lab is that since, as I mentioned before, you can't really sequence break this chapter, it's really all about movement optimizations. I know I mentioned before that this game is a lot about tiny optimizations here and there all over the run, but this chapter especially is very heavily optimized for every category of the game. Any percent in particular is pretty much one big skip and then just this chapter, and so the times for that game have been pushed down so far that the top 30 runs or so are separated by mere milliseconds. It's really crazy. I can give some shoutouts later, but there's some other things I want to explain at the current moment. So yeah, this is the valve we need to turn off his life support fluid. After I turn the valve here, I'm going to do a small optimization where I land on these gas tanks, and then jump off the gas tanks. That avoids having to run down the stairs I went up before, so that saves a few seconds. We'll be running over to the life support wires that we need to cut, and I'll take that time that I'll be taking here to run to the wires to shout out a few people. In particular, I want to shout out a few people from the Outlast community, and generally other horror game runners that touch this game. Phalix Boy, who I mentioned before. Zeno, who is another good friend of mine, top level runner of this game, with any percent in glitchless in particular for the main game. Andy, who's all-around good runner of not only this game, but also plenty of other pretty good horror games, like Penumbra, Amnesia, and Soma, I believe. Also runs a few other neat games like Darksiders 3. St. Connor, who I mentioned before, who ran this game at AGDQ 2016. When he ran this at AGDQ 2014, it was my main inspiration for running this game, And so if he didn't do the run, that run at AGDQ 2014, I probably wouldn't have ran this game, to be quite honest. It's the main inspiration for me running this game, so huge thanks to him for that. Anyways, I'll do more shoutouts in a bit, but right now we have a trick called the Superman. Now basically I'm going to jump on top of these railings, and then jump to the void here to trigger a cutscene, and that ends up saving around 15 seconds as opposed to what the intended strat is there, which is to run down the same way I came to that room there, and then jump across the gap. And there's another small trick here. As I kind of run down here, I'm going to vault into this wall, and as I fall down, I'm going to point my camera at the wall. That was an animation cancel. I didn't do a jump or anything to cancel the jump though. What I actually did is as I said, I looked at the wall, and what happened there is that since I was looking at the wall, Miles didn't have any room to do the hard fall animation, and so it ended up getting completely skipped there. And also I animation canceled the button right there. It saved around a couple seconds doing that. So what's happening at this point is we've killed Billy Hope, but the Wall Rider needs a living human as a host in order to survive. And of course we just so happen to be the nearest living human, so he goes inside of our body there. And we'll be stumbling to the end here with the Wall Rider inside of our body. And there's a small little trick I'm going to do once I gain control here, after Miles very slowly gets up. There's this railing here, or rather there's these stairs I'm normally supposed to climb up. But doing so triggers a 30-second or so, or 20-second or so cutscene, where Miles stumbles around, and by climbing the railing there, we end up skipping that. Timing, by the way, once I start this cutscene, is around 30 seconds from now. So yeah, to give some last-minute shoutouts here, I mentioned the other people I mentioned before, but one last shoutout I want to give is, I believe, Albino Hat. He was unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he was a big glitch hunter for this game, and really helped advance this game in the early stages of it being speedrun. Huge thank you to him. I miss you a lot. Alright, anyway, that's time. Timing right there is when I touch the ground to start the last cutscene. And the last cutscene here is we come across Warren Key with some army forces who, since we have the Wall Rider in our body, shoot us to death. So yeah, one last shout out I want to give as well is to you, the GDQ Games Committee, watching this video. I'm being quite honest when I say that I literally put my heart and soul into speedrunning this game for the past 5 years or so now. And I've been putting a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and hard work into making this game GDQ acceptable, or at least as enticing for GDQ acceptance as possible. And because of that hard work that I've been putting into submitting this game, and the advancements we've made with this game in the past few years, it would be really nice if we could get this game into a GDQ. So anyways, that was my submission of Outlast for AGDQ 2020. I've been Nerd Squared. This has been No Out of Bounds for the main game, and I hope you consider my run.